Hi, Peter. So everybody, when you enter, you're automatically muted. So
Hey,
if
how's it
you're
going?
great, great. So I didn't know if we were going to have you show up or not. So that's great that you're here, and I hope you can stay for the whole meeting.
Yeah, love to.
Awesome.
How's
Okay.
everything been going with you? Going
Uh,
good?
yeah, good. I mean, I was just sharing before the meeting officially started. I've been a little under the weather lately, and it has prevented me from doing as much bird watching as I'd like to do. But uh, I intend to get out there and get back in action
Great.
and start seeing some birds. And certainly talking about your guys' trip out to Big Pine Mountain is a good way of whetting my appetite for going out and seeing cool birds.
Absolutely. Yeah, we had a really good trip, as
All right,
I'm
well,
sure you've heard.
yeah, and I'm looking forward to hearing more. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to try and keep the meeting to about an hour, which means we really need to zip to get through everything. But if we go over, that's okay too. I mean, as long as it's okay with everybody else. Um, but welcome officially to this meeting of Carpinteria Birdwatchers for Thursday, July 28th, 2022. Today's meeting, we're going to have two topics. First, Jenny Slaughter is going to talk about the whole thing that happened recently with the brown pelicans, where they were showing up in large numbers in strange places and in poor condition, and there was a whole rescue effort. And I won't say more about it because I don't really know more, but Jenny does. So she'll be able to talk about that. And then in the second part of the meeting, we're going to talk about Big Pine Mountain, which is a really cool birding spot in a very remote corner, probably the most remote part of Santa Barbara County, with some really special birds. And we have people here who have been there recently and been there going back in time for a while too. So that's a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to that. So before we get started with that, is there any, burning bird news that people want to share before we jump in? Any spectacular sightings lately? I know some of you have been out there and seen the reddish egret that's at Goleta Beach Park. That was the one bird I actually did get out of my house and go chase, even though I wasn't feeling 100%, because I was like, oh, it's right there. I got to go see that bird. And it was very cooperative. So that was fun. Okay, well, again, given the tight timetable, I'm just going to zip along and go ahead and invite Jenny to maybe share your screen, and then you can show your slides about and talk about the brown pelican rescue. And I apologize, I don't have a good bio on the top of my head that I can use to introduce you. I mean, you're such a, you're a long-running part of Carpinteria Birdwatchers, so I assume everyone knows you. But all I really know in terms of sort of standard, introductory info, like for a speaker, is that, well, you've done a lot of biological resource work in the area. You've done a lot of survey work, and you're out there in the field all the time. You're involved with the Wildlife Care Network and this recent pelican operation. Maybe you can start off by just summarizing in a very brief way, your qualifications to address the group about this.
Sure, I'd be happy to. And this is going to be so weird because I can't see you guys anymore, but you can see my first slide of the pelicans, right?
Yes, it is on the screen.
Okay. I am a wildlife biologist. I work as an environmental consultant with a local-ish company for about 20 years. I do lots of different things for them, mostly kind of boring stuff like writing plans, but occasionally I get to go in the field and do wildlife surveys, which is how I met Peter, our special guest also, because Peter and I worked on the same solar project years and years ago. And then Holly, who's one of our bird watchers, and I think she's on this call. Holly is a marine biologist that I worked with in Fiji 20 years ago. So we have these funny connections with this group. And I've been a volunteer for Wildlife Care Network since probably 1996 or something like that. So, okay, and then just ask questions as we go if you have any. We had a really strange year with pelicans at the Wildlife Care Network. It happened incredibly fast. Suddenly, we just started getting reports that there were sick and injured pelicans all over Santa Barbara County. Same thing was happening in Ventura. Volunteers were, trying to get organized. And the way Wildlife Care Network works is the dispatcher knows the general area where you live, say Carpinteria or Summerland, Goleta. And when they get reports from those areas, they really try to match somebody close by to pick up these animals. As it got really crazy in May and June, we started our own Carpinteria area text group that included the coordinator from the Wildlife Center. So instead of trying to go down a list of people to call, she would just send a text to our group and someone would respond. And it was an incredible effort on all of, the carp local people's part to get this text group going, and people were going above and beyond to help anything they could do to get these animals to the center. These birds looked really, really sick when we would go find them. Some of them were already dead by the time we showed up. The one you see here, this is at Santa Barbara Harbor, and you can see she's putting one in a box, and there's three behind her that are all lethargic. And I don't know the details from this day, but this woman who's a volunteer in this picture, she was actually someone who called about a sick common murre in Carpinteria a few months ago. And I was dispatched to go pick that bird up. And she became a volunteer because she thought, this is so great. Anyway, so that was just kind of a really cool story about meeting people and getting people involved in this effort, which turned out to be really huge. Nobody could figure out, I think a lot of people assume there was some sort of a health issue with these birds, meaning like a parasite or some domoic acid or some red tide issue, which has definitely occurred in the past. But we just didn't know and had to take a long time until we found out. I got a call, or it was one of those text groups from the Center for our local people, that there was a woman on the way to Ojai on the 150 who had one next to her driveway. And that was just one of the weirdest ones. It was in an oak woodland. It was almost like they were dropping out of the sky. So really, really sad. And I can't imagine how many we never found, The totals for our local wildlife network, we had more than 260 pelicans that were taken into care and processed through the Goleta Hospital. The brown pelicans seemed like they were the only species affected. And like I said, the volunteers got organized and we were really busy. Oops, I'm just new at this, so here we go. These are volunteers transporting animals into the pool area after they'd been checked by the vet. So these animals were going to be outside. This is the new hospital at Wildlife Care Network. This hospital just got completed this year, and the timing could not have been better. The process for when the birds came in is they were examined for other injuries, and some of them definitely had significant injuries, broken bones, broken wings. A common thing is they get fish hooks and fishing line kind of twisted around and tangled. They all get hydration immediately, and they get a treatment for parasites, for mites and worms. They were fed a lot of fish. Over 6,000 pounds were purchased. It was about $10,000 worth to support the pelicans over this time. Channel Islands Marine Wildlife Institute and the zoo stepped in to help donate fish because it was hard to come by. The birds were cold, they were emaciated, so they needed a lot of supportive care, and they underwent some blood testing. The birds that recovered were released throughout the area, and it took about, I want to say 45 days, maybe 50, until the first birds were released. So it was a long process, and I don't have the exact number of birds that made it, but I think it was about 30% did not make it. And I remember going to the center one day while they were loading up someone's truck with carcasses. It was so sad. Both young and adult birds were affected. It was, wide. Fish and Game did investigate, and that they determined it was not due to any disease. And I will follow up on that in this program. And this is just some of the internal buildings that they were originally housing. These animals were maybe too cold to go outside to the pool area. And they could be together, and they were constantly fed and monitored. And they're very messy, but the new center has an amazing, setup. So it was just really lucky that they got all this accomplished in time for the pelican issue. So they just would leave the food out for them, and they could feed as they liked, but they also do kind of like it when you feed them by hand. But you'll see in one of my videos that they would just dig in here and gulp these down.
So Jenny, I think when I watched this before, this video does not have sound, right? But there's some other videos that do.
Right.
So there's nothing wrong with your screen, with your audio. Can I ask another question?
Sure.
I noticed in the video, a lot of the birds are banded. Did they band all the birds that they brought in?
They didn't. And I think the tape on them was just a temporary thing at the center. But they did band some. I just think they couldn't keep up. I think the bands here were temporary. I really don't know for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And pelicans are really smelly. So you can imagine what it smelled like at the center. It's hard enough having 1 or 2, let alone 4 in your car driving to Goleta. So once they kind of get more stable, they are released into these pens. There's 2 big pool pens, enclosures at the center, and it's just great. They're wonderful big spaces for them, but they did get really crowded. As a volunteer for over 20 years, I've never once been involved in a release of any animal. And when they called and said, we need someone to come pick up 5 pelicans and take them to the beach and release them, I couldn't wait. I couldn't pass it up. So met them in Goleta and got 4 in the truck and had another volunteer grab the other one. And then we coordinated with John and Tom and Laurel, our other co-hosts, on getting access to Sandyland down here so they could be released in a really nice quiet place in the estuary down here at the salt marsh. And it turned out to be the most ideal location, I think. Here's a video. Ours is at the beginning. And we did get some follow-up information after all of the studies that took place by California Department of Fish and Wildlife. They basically figured out that it was due to starvation. For some reason, these pelicans this year couldn't access their food. And someone that's down here locally who does a lot of wildlife rescue, her name's Connie, you guys probably know her. She told me that this has happened before over the years, and she thinks the theory is their bait fish are too deep for the pelicans to dive to. So they try and they hit the water so hard because they want to get down to the fish, and they end up hurting themselves. And it's just a lot harder for them to get to the fish. So that's a theory that is going around, but they did at least determine that it wasn't some disease or toxin. But just when you think we didn't need to worry about any diseases, there is a new outbreak of avian influenza, and it's in California. Pelicans can be affected, and we already have one pelican in California that tested positive. As volunteers for the Wildlife Network, we had to undergo special training. I'm a transporter. I don't work at the center, so my training was different, but the folks at the center, including the vet who is there full-time, they have to change shoes when they leave the property and get on the property. They change their clothes when they're working on property, bring different clothes to go home in, immediately shower, because it's very easily transmissible, and it actually is able to be given to people. This particular strain is transmissible to people. So we all have to be really careful. It mostly occurs in geese and ducks, waterfowl, some shorebirds, and raptors, or any other bird that eats other birds. Not really songbird issue, but it's not impossible. And they are, like I said, there's 5 cases in California. The Wildlife Network is not taking any raptors or geese anymore because of these concerns. All raptors are getting routed to Ojai. They're trying to decrease the chance for transmission. And then geese, the Wildlife Center doesn't get a lot of geese, but that's why they're not taking geese right now. And they just gave these guidelines. If you're a transporter, you just be careful, wear your PPE, gloves, mask, same thing, sanitize everything, wash your clothes. But I thought it was important to bring that up because it is in California, and they did say, do not feed wild birds, but hummingbird feeders might be okay. Empty your bird baths, empty feeders is always kind of a good practice, but I'm sure there's a lot of ways you can sanitize these things as well. I think that was it for my pelican update.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Jenny. I wanted to give a few minutes for people if they had questions. I know there was a lot of interest in this as it was happening. And it is, I mean, it's an unfortunate story overall, but it does have kind of a, I want to say a positive spin, but at least it was a less bad a scenario than it could have been, right? In the sense that it was a fluctuation maybe in food supply, not so much like with the pelicans, not so much an outbreak of some very serious contagious disease or a poisoning event or something.
It also could be a factor that they are doing so well, their numbers are increasing. Maybe there's like the balancing point is getting figured out.
Yeah, but, sort of a boom and bust cycle.
Yeah.
Okay, well, other questions for Jenny about the pelicans? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Eric Von Schroeder. My camera's not working, but my question is, when you mentioned that the bait fish were deeper than usual, is there any theory as to why that was? And could it because
Hello?
You cut out at the end there, Eric. Can you repeat the last part? And I'm going to suggest, Jenny, if you stop sharing your screen, it might make it easier for us to see more thumbnails, or at least for you to see more.
Oh, yeah.
No, my question was, is there any theory as to why the bait fish were deeper, too deep for the pelicans to reach them? And was that potentially because of warmer water and the fish were staying deep where it was cooler?
That makes a lot of sense. I have gone fishing a few times during this time, and I always think it's very hard to find bait fish, but Craig and I got a lot of bait fish recently, so I don't know if it just seemed like maybe there is a reason why they were deeper, and that seems to make a lot of sense if it's warmer on the top, but I'm not 100% sure.
Okay, any other questions for Jenny before we move on to our Big Pine Mountain section? Yeah, Anne, I see you've got a hand up.
Just kind of wondering, what was the process for people to get involved and volunteer around this? Was it just happenstance? You happened to find a bird and you called, and then one thing led to another, or?
I will say that we got so many new volunteers during this event that way. People who would find the animal, they would know, or someone would tell them, call the Wildlife Care Network. When you call the Wildlife Care Network, I think what they really try to get you to do is they say, could you please bring it to us? Otherwise, we're going to have to go through our phone list and call and call and call until we find someone. And I feel like a lot of people just kind of start that way. It's pretty intimidating to pick up a bird, let alone a big bird like a pelican. And you have to be prepared with a box, and you really don't want to hold it on your lap because they're really gross. And when they're sick, they smell bad and they have more lice and things like that. So, but people did, they rallied, they did what it took, or, like I said, we organized these text groups, and then rescuers or reporters would get interested and contact the center and sign up to volunteer and get trained. So it was really, really awesome that way. Yeah.
Sounds like great.
Okay, yeah. Suzanne, I see you got your hand up.
Yeah, I really enjoyed your presentation and the videos especially too. And I'm surprised that those pelicans were so calm and well behaved. I don't know, even in that very crowded condition. I mean, is it the nature of pelicans to be so calm? How is it possible? I mean, wild birds, I would think they would be really skittish.
Okay, well, you're so right. But when they're sick, they don't have the energy. Holly, who's on the call, Holly and I chased a pelican around the block down by 4th Beach, and it just wasn't sick enough to let us catch it.
Oh,
and that happens a lot with any injured animal or sick bird, especially. They have to be sick enough to let you walk up and grab them. And but pelicans, really, they're kind of my favorite because they're never like one to go after you.
Yeah,
they'll flop around, but that's fine. Like cormorants and other kind of birds will try to get you in the face. So pelicans are, I would say, more docile than most.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you again a lot. And Jenny, we're going to come back to you very shortly. So
sounds good.
There'll be more opportunities to talk to Jenny. But I want to go ahead and move on now and get to part 2 of the meeting, which is about Big Pine Mountain and the really interesting birds and bird surveys that are out there. And I guess for that, I will go ahead and share my screen briefly, and then we're going to come back to talk about some of the other visits. But I'm going to do sort of an overview, and then we'll get into the specifics of some of the recent trips out there. Let's see if I can do this correctly. Okay, so if I've done this correctly, you're seeing my screen.
Yes.
Okay, good. So I need to kind of set the scene a little bit. So here's an overview of, a Google Maps view of Santa Barbara County. And you can kind of see the darker areas where the mountain ranges are. And basically there are 3 main mountain ranges in Santa Barbara County. There's the Santa Ynez Range, here along the south coast. There's the San Rafael Mountains that kind of run diagonally down the middle of the county. And then there's the Sierra Madre Range, which is up in the northeastern part of the county, bordering the Cuyama Valley. And this middle range, the San Rafael Mountains, down towards the southeast edge of the county is where the highest part of it is. And where this red pin is here is where Big Pine Mountain is. And it is the highest point in Santa Barbara County. It's a little over 6,800 feet. It gets described as a sky island, which is sort of an ecological term where, because it's that high, it has conifers. It has pines and other kinds of trees like that, It has, different ecological conditions than most of the county, which is at lower elevation with chaparral or grasslands. So you get these isolated areas with that habitat that are up on these peaks, and throughout, the western part of the US, or certainly the southwestern part of the US, you have this sky island phenomenon where you'll have these mountains will push up and they'll get these little areas that ecologically function like islands. There are birds that like, or organisms, plants and animals that like to live in those conditions. And the parts in between those mountain peaks are not suitable for them. So they exhibit a lot of the same characteristics that islands do in terms of distribution of species. And it makes for really interesting research into the distribution of these organisms. So in 1981, and a lot of this information I'm giving you is based on the description that Joan Lentz gives in her latest book, Story of a Santa Barbara Birder, which I am a big fan of, and I encourage you, if you haven't read it, to read it, because it's a really great book, and Joan tells a really good story. But chapter 10 in that book is about her involvement in the bird surveys at Big Pine Mountain, and I kind of mentioned this already, but it's very isolated. And we can talk about that more. And as we talk to people who've been out there, they can give a little more detail about just what's involved in getting there. It's not easy. It's you have some different ways you can get there, but they all have their difficulties associated with them. So it was never really birded, at least not in modern times, until 1981, when Paul Lehman and John Dunn went out there in conjunction with some condor researchers, some of the last free-flying California condors before they took them all into captivity as part of the the recovery effort. Some of the last wild ones were actually nesting in the area of Big Pine Mountain, so they went out there as part of with some condor biologists and surveyed the birds up there and found a lot of really interesting birds that you don't find elsewhere in the county. And then for the next 12 years or so, Joan Lentz primarily organized annual survey trips where they'd go out there in the summer and they'd see what breeding birds were there. And a lot of people participated, but Joan was sort of the organizer of it. And then in 1993, she published a paper on this in Western Birds, and you can read it online. I find it fascinating reading. I encourage you to seek it. I've got a link to it in the description for this YouTube video and on the webpage at carpbirdwatchers.org for this meeting. But she just goes in detail through the different species that you find up there. Here's sort of the beginning of that article. It's a scientific paper, but I think it's quite accessible even for a layperson like myself. So I encourage you to seek it out. And jumping forward a few years, and again, I'm going pretty fast because I want to get to the actual visits and talk to the people who've been there lately. But in 2007, there was a really big fire in that part of the Santa Barbara County backcountry, the Zaca fire, and it burned over the Big Pine Mountain area. And I don't know that this photo is specifically of that, but it certainly could be. I mean, it's certainly one of the higher peaks with conifers on it that they're showing burning here. But the Zaca fire was a very intense fire. At the time, it was one of the biggest fires in California history. It has since gone on to be eclipsed by subsequent fires because these really big, really hot fires are becoming more characteristic, unfortunately, for mountaintop conifers. So it burned over the site. And one of the things I am really interested in talking about, since I know we have Peter Gady here, and Peter has, as far as I know, has been doing bird surveys out there from before the time of the Zaca fire. I'm really curious about just how specifically it changed as a result of that. Here's an aerial view looking at Big Pine Mountain. So in this view, we're kind of looking back towards the coast. So we're looking kind of southwest. But here's the mountain in the foreground, and we're looking at sort of this northern slope of the mountain. This you can sort of see, I'm not sure how clear it is on your end, but there's a little bit of a line there. That's the road that comes in, the Big Pine Road or Buckhorn Road, depending on what part of the road you're talking about. But it's the Forest Service road that can give you access to it. And then this whole part of the mountain is covered in trees. And my understanding is that basically it was the upper reaches, like the very top of the mountain, that lost a lot of the big trees that had been up there. as a result of the Zaka fire, but we can talk about that more later. But then a lot of these trees down here did survive, so there's still a good amount of that special habitat there. In terms of some of the special birds that you can see there, there's a bunch more of them, but these are just the ones I'm going to focus on. One is the flammulated owl, which is a very cool owl that I would love to see and never have seen or heard for that matter. It's actually really small. You can't really tell from the photo, but it's smaller than a screech owl. It's a very small owl. And in North American owls, it's unique in that it has the dark eye look, you know, kind of like a spotted owl does. It doesn't have the light irises that a screech owl would have. And it also has a really low hoot. Like it sounds like a much bigger owl in some ways. You know, it's got this very low, we could play an example of it maybe later, but I'm trying to make rapid progress here. So we'll just keep going. But another fun fact about it is it's almost exclusively an insect eater. So it doesn't eat rodents or birds like some of the other owl species. And as a result of that, it's highly migratory. So in the winter months, we don't have a lot of insects, and they all go to Mexico and point south. And then they come up, you know, they migrate north in the breeding season. And it turns out they do, in fact, breed on Big Pine Mountain. It's probably the only place you can reliably hear or see flammulated owls in Santa Barbara County, is to go out there in the breeding season and listen for the hooting. And they're really cute. Then white-headed woodpeckers, another species. This one breeds throughout mountainous or, you know, conifer habitat in the western part of North America. But if you want to see it in Santa Barbara County, again, Big Pine Mountain is the most reliable place to see it. It's quite rare to see it anywhere else, but relatively easy to see it there. And finally, dusky flycatcher, which is a little Empidonax flycatcher, one of the group that, you know, of Empidonaxes that are notoriously challenging to identify. One of the better ways to identify a dusky flycatcher is its singing. So if you can find them on territory in the summer and giving their song, that is helpful. And it turns out that the slopes of Big Pine Mountain, some of the brushy areas, you know, not so much in the forest, but along the edges of the forest in the brush, they do breed there, and you can reliably hear and see them there, or somewhat reliably. I don't mean to rub salt into the wound for one of our attendees who I know wanted to see them this year and did not manage to see one, but they're still there. Still have a chance, maybe later. Anyway, and then we're gonna go and look in detail at some of the recent visits, and these are just a few of the recent visits. You know, Peter Gady. So at a certain point, and maybe Peter, if you're unmuted, you might chime in and let me know about this. At a certain point, Joan kind of, you know, started becoming more difficult for her to make the trip out there, and she kind of handed off the organizing of the annual survey trips to Peter. And Peter has been involved in most of the survey trips since that time. The only time I've ever been there was in the survey in 2018, in June of 2018, when I was fortunate enough to get to go along, and it was a great experience. I really loved going out there. So I'm going to talk about that trip just a little bit, because I've got some pictures to share of what it looked like when we were out there. And then for the rest of the meeting, we're going to talk about the 3 trips that took place just in the last few weeks or last couple months, where Linus Blomqvist was the first birder to get out there that I know of this year. And he basically just went in by himself with a backpack. He just said, you know, screw it, it's too hard to get permission, I'm just going to go in myself. So he hiked he hiked over 50 miles. He spent 4 days, pretty impressive feat to be, at least. But he hiked in sort of from the northeast side, which is the side you can kind of get, it's the closest access if you're on foot or on a bike or something. And so we don't have Linus in this meeting. Unfortunately, he's visiting family in Sweden. So he regretfully sent his regrets. It's the middle of the night for him there, so he couldn't be in the meeting. But we can look at his eBird trip report maybe and see what he saw. And then June 17th through 19th, Jenny and Peter, along with Hugh Ranson and Curtis Morantz, made a trip in from the Southwest, and we can find out from them more details about that journey, but they were in there for 3 days. And then finally, Steve Colwell, who's also in the meeting, went in with Mark Holmgren via e-bikes, and they came in via Linus's route. They came in from the Northeast and covered that terrain to get in there for a, what, 5, 6, 7, another a 4-day trip. So I'm excited to hear about all those. So let me just zip through my photos of my 2018 trip. So I thought this was interesting. This is on the drive-in, and on the drive-in, we went through area that at that time, about 6 months before, had burned in the Thomas fire. So, you know, this is not the Zaka fire, but this is kind of the equivalent of what you might have seen if you were up on, you know, the vicinity of Big Pine Mountain in 2007 when the Zaka fire burned through there. Here's some more views of, again, you know, you kind of get where you can see there were large trees there, and if the fire is hot enough as it comes through, you know, those trees don't make it. And that's what happened in a lot of these forested areas with these really hot fires. There's Peter along the road on our trip in. And this, I like this view of the road because it kind of gives you an idea of what I'm talking about when I say it's a road, right? It's, and you know, on our visit, it wasn't in that bad a condition. We didn't have to clear a lot of boulders or anything. I understand when you guys went in this year, Jenny and Peter, there was a lot more effort involved. It was even less a road than in this photo. But for those who get kind of squeamish about, you know, drop-offs without guardrails, you just want to squeeze your eyes shut for this whole trip, because there's a lot of this kind of thing as you're going through this rugged terrain. Oh, and I thought this was fun, so I wanted to share this. You know, I had never even heard about digger bees, but at one little turn, little hairpin turn along the road, there were all these little tunnels in the soft dirt at the edge of the road. And here's a video of what we experienced there.
By far, like the most I've ever seen.
And these roads don't get a lot of traffic. I mean, we were going past locked Forest Service gates to get there. So the bees were just like, you know, perfectly fine, just right out on the road.
But yeah, Blackchin, I guess, how far down was it? Not that we're going to go back down, though. Just curious. That looks so weird.
Yeah. Looks like I should not be standing here.
We're just surrounded by these bees. So that's Will Knowlton who was saying that, who was the driver of the vehicle I was in. Once we got there, this was before I was really doing bird photography. This is the only photo of a bird I brought back from Big Pine Mountain. It's like my phone held up to my binoculars, but it's an olive-sided flycatcher that was up there. One of the montane species that you'll find up there breeding. This is us hiking down into the area of the Sisquoc River, sort of from Alamar Saddle. So a little bit just past Big Pine Mountain, there's a trail that descends along the headwaters of the Sisquoc River, but just lots of ceanothus blooming. It's hard to see him, but there's Connor Scotland standing along this little creek that's the headwaters of the Sisquoc, and just, you know, surrounded by these big tall trees. There's a selfie of our group in 2018. And this is where we camped, where, you know, again, because there's no vehicles on this road, we basically just camp on the road. And I understand that's sort of standard practice for these survey trips. It's like a nice flat space, you just set your tent there. This is us enjoying the sunset, kind of at the edge of that camping area. Got very pretty, and I was excited on the sunset because we had one night there. And, you know, for me, one of the big attractions was the owls. Like there's these special owls, like the flammulated owl out there at Big Pine Mountain. You know, I'm always a little reticent about, you know, using playback for owls. I don't want to disturb the owls, but if it's part of this official survey effort, you know, it's like, okay, it's like this one time, it's for a good scientific purpose. You know, I normally am not engaging in a lot of playback these days, but if I'm, you know, happen to be alongside people who have a good reason to be doing it, I'm certainly not above like listening in and seeing what results it produces. I knew that in 2016, they'd had a really productive owling outing, you know, a couple of years before this trip. Unfortunately, on our trip, this was the only owl we got, and I didn't even see this one. It was really windy on that one night. So, we went to all the spots, we played recordings of owls, and you couldn't hear anything respond. So it was quite frustrating from an owling standpoint. Peter and Will were turning over rocks and logs. They were very into herping as part of this outing. It wasn't just birds they were interested in. They wanted to find snakes. And so they found a bunch of snakes, which was fun. This is a fresh bear track along the trail with a human hand for scale. Peter set up a game camera. This is about, I don't know, a few hundred yards from our campsite where he'd put out some bait and by this trail cam. And so it was visited by a bear at the same time I was birding, like not far from here. That was kind of exciting. This is sort of the West Big Pine area. You're looking towards Big Pine Mountain in this view. And then this kind of ridge line that extends to the northwest. That's where we birded on our second day. This is us hiking through that area, kind of enjoying the view. And that is it for me and my slides from that trip. I think I wanted to share the trip report from, so this is my trip report. I'm going to skip that and look at Linus's trip report from his backpacking trip. So again, he started up here in Santa Barbara Canyon, and basically, you hike along these quite steep roads, brings you up along here, and eventually you get to Big Pine Mountain. I think this is, yeah, so that's still the Medolce Trail. Here's where Big Pine Mountain is. Yeah, Alomar Campground, Upper Bear Campground. Basically, Big Pine Mountain is right here. Interesting that he doesn't have checklists right here. I'd have to go back and look at his checklist in detail. He didn't get a lot of photos on his trip, but he did get a lot of recordings. So here, we'll listen to his flammulated owl recording. That's the low hoot, is the flam. So I'm not great at all of these species. I'm hearing, besides the flammulated owl, I'm hearing Western wood pewee and a Western tanager. Not sure what the other stuff was. Peter, I'm sure you're like, hearing that and just cataloging everything that you're hearing. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead then and stop sharing my screen. So we can hear from people who've been there recently. So as I say, the next trip was the one that Peter and Jenny did. So take it away, Jenny.
Okay, sorry, I couldn't figure out how to get off mute. Personally, I think getting there is equally amazing as birding there. I've always loved hiking in the Los Padres, and to get access to drive to this location is something that I could not pass up, and I would never pass up again. It's so wonderful to drive through this area. And we go through the first gate, the locked Forest Service gate at Upper Oso, which is a campground off Paradise Road. And we had to do a lot of coordination with the Forest Service in order to get permission. They wanted a safety plan. They wanted to know details of the people and the vehicles. You can imagine there's no cell reception for the most part up in this area. So, and they can't guarantee what the road's gonna look like, what the conditions are. We found this picture of when the roads were built. I just thought it was pretty cool. And when we went this year, the road was pretty good, except for, oops, darn it, how do you go back?
I think left arrow and right arrow will move you back and forth in the
Yeah, okay.
Google Slides.
We had, when I say we, I mean Peter and the guys had to shovel out and move a bunch of big rocks in order for us to get through this section. But just before this little section was kind of a slide area that was incredibly nerve-wracking to get through. And fortunately, Peter offered to drive my car over that. It was a sheer drop on one side. And anyway, white knuckle driving conditions in this one section, but the rest of it was pretty good.
Hey, Jenny,
Uh-huh.
can I jump in? I had a question. I was going to ask Peter. I know, on our trip, there were 2 vehicles, I think. On your trip, there were 2 vehicles. Is that sort of a standard operating procedure you have for these surveys? Is that you've got 2 vehicles, at least a couple of vehicles going in there?
Yeah, I think we try to have 2 and sometimes even 3, just in case, you're back up in there and something happens.
Yeah.
You've got at least one truck to be able to go down.
Yeah, I
And,
didn't.
4-wheel drive is pretty much a requirement to, with a little bit of high clearance.
Yeah, I didn't really emphasize this in my intro, but it really is quite remote and isolated out there. You've got a big wilderness area, the Dick Smith Wilderness Area on one side of the road, and you've got the San Rafael Wilderness on the other side of the road, and just this little ribbon alongside this road that you're on that kind of bisects those two wilderness areas. But except for that, pretty sketchy road that you're on, there's no facilities, there's no, easy source of rescue. You're very isolated, you're very far out there. So, I think I didn't grow up in Santa Barbara, and I hadn't spent a lot of time in the Santa Barbara backcountry. And I think I had kind of a naive view that, it's Santa Barbara. It's not like real wilderness. It's not that, seriously remote like the Sierras or the Rockies, but it's like, no, you're out there. You're on your own when you're out there, and you have to be self-sufficient. Anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was curious about that aspect of it. So please continue, Jenny.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the Forest Service, they want to know, sometimes they want you to call, check in once or twice a day or text if you can. And I mean, it's just not possible. I know my cell service wasn't good up there, but I think Peter's was better. But still, yeah. This is the campsite again on the road. And we had wonderful weather. It was beautiful and warm the first night and no wind. So we took advantage of that, and we went owling. But since we have Peter, this is Peter, Hugh, and David Kistner, and they had gone up on this trip, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, and they found an incredible special thing. So I think, Peter, if you want to go ahead and talk about this story, I've got your follow-up pictures as we go.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jenny. Yeah, you guys did a great summary of the area, and you can tell, in this photo, there's a lot of burned trees there. So this is 2 years after the fire, so 2009. And the one story that Jenny's mentioning is we were up looking actually for spotted owls. And so we were hiking up these canyons, using a little bit of playback or voice hooting for them, in the hope that they would respond. And we heard another call that was a northern goshawk, and we knew immediately what it was because the call is pretty distinctive. And we looked at each other and we're like, okay, is this really what we're hearing? Sometimes Steller's jays will mimic other birds, and so do have to be kind of careful of that. But this was so loud and clear that we were pretty confident that it was a goshawk. And here's a great picture of the male that we had come in, and we got some photos of it. So we were really excited that we were able to document this bird. It's a super rare bird in Southern California in general. And there are a few records for Santa Barbara County, but it's they're few and far between. And typically they're in the winter. All of the other records are actually in the winter. So having one up there in the summer on Big Pine, in like habitat that you would expect to see him in the Sierras, it was really exciting. So the story does go on. I don't know if you have another photo after this, but we were enjoying this bird and trying to document it because we knew, we wanted to, make sure that as we went back, that people would ask, "Oh, are you sure it was a goshawk and it wasn't a Cooper's hawk maybe or some other species?" And so we were photographing it and spending time with it. And then all of a sudden, lo and behold, we see in the top of this burned tree a nest. And we see the bird go to the nest. And so we're like, "Oh my gosh, are these goshawks breeding here?" And as it turns out, they were. And we found the first nest for Santa Barbara County. And so we were looking around. We hiked up on a cliff to try to get a look into the nest, and we saw 2 nestlings in there that were probably about 2 weeks old when we found them. So so a few of us decided to write a paper on it because it was such a noteworthy event and record. And with this nest, typically goshawks will put them in trees where there's like some canopy over, so it's like protected by branches and kind of in more denser areas. And for whatever reason, these birds decided to put it right on the top of a broken top conifer that had been burned. So that again was like kind of unusual. So that was nice to be able to include that in the paper. We did go back later in July, and we were able to confirm that the nestlings fledged. So they left the nest and hopefully grew up to be adults, but they were at least juvenile birds when we left them in July.
Peter, you might as well talk about this too.
This guy. Does anybody have any questions about the goshawks before we move on?
I was going to ask, I know that they were detected there subsequently once or twice, or I mean, that wasn't the only time that you had them out there. I know when we went in 2018, we had our eyes peeled, like, oh, be sure to notice if there's any goshawks around. Was there a continuing presence there?
Yeah, so good question. We obviously we hoped that we would see more breeding in the following years. We did the year after that, and then I think the following year as well, we did have a bird or two up there. We were never able to locate another nest, so we don't know, if maybe there was a nest that we just couldn't find, which could have been the case. But after those 2 years after, we've never recorded them up there again, unfortunately. So maybe it was just kind of a situation where the birds kind of came over from, say, neighboring Ventura, Mount Pinos or something, and decided to breed and then disappeared for whatever reason. And every year we go up, our fingers are crossed that we'll find them. But it's been a while.
That's so awesome that you guys stumbled upon that.
Yeah, and so flammulated owl, most years when we go up, we only hear the bird. We rarely see them. We do look, but as John mentioned, they're really hard to see. They're tiny owls, and they're way up in the trees, oftentimes hidden by branches, and they're great at disguising where they are. There was one year we went up, in 2009, the goshawk year, where one came down really close to where we were, and so we were able to get these like amazing photos. We were super excited to be able to, like this one here, just basically get all the photos we wanted to at very close range. But these guys are, as John mentioned, insectivorous. They nest in cavities, so they're very dependent on woodpeckers to excavate the cavities, and then they come in later and use them. So the fact that there's this forest up there with that hasn't been cut, there's a lot of really old growth trees left, and a lot of woodpeckers and a lot of cavities for them to nest in, is great. So there's a lot we could say about them, but they're super cool little owl.
We, on our trip in June, we were fortunate enough to have the data from Linus, and Linus had records, and he gave us the exact location on the road of where to listen for these guys. So on Friday night, when the weather was so nice, no wind, you could hear very well, we took a night walk, and went to the exact location and were able to hear this bird or a flammulated owl in the distance, but we were able to figure out exactly what tree it was in. We had to hike up this big kind of hill. And I mean, we were standing at the base of the tree and we never saw the bird, but it was calling the entire time. It's pretty cool. I count it that I have experienced one. I still haven't seen one, but it's good enough for me. That was a total treat. Oh, I forgot the effect here. Anyway.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. I know that Curtis Morantz was on the trip, and Curtis famously, although he's a very expert at identifying birds by ear, he won't count them for his official lists if it's just a herd record. So I mean,
he tried very hard.
I was going to say, it would almost be more entertaining to watch Curtis having to deal with the frustration of not seeing that owl,
Right.
as it would be exciting to hear it.
It was great. Peter, do you want to just go through these are pictures from Hugh Ranson, who was with us, and he's an excellent photographer. Peter, you want to run through these as I pull them up?
Sure. So yeah, the dusky flycatcher, this is the same bird that John showed earlier. It's a little flycatcher. It's the only place that it breeds in Santa Barbara County is up there. And one of the things, just kind of a side note, so with these surveys, we go up, we try to go up every year, and we also try to cover the same areas every year. So we have these little trails and certain, regions within the larger region that we try to cover. And the reason why we do that is just to repeat the surveys and collect data that we can compare between years and over time. So that's why this whole database since 1981 is just really valuable, because we can start to look at, how numbers are increasing or decreasing, or what new species are showing up, which are kind of blinking out. And for whatever reason, this year we only found, I think, 2 dusky flycatchers, and usually we're getting, double digits. We don't really know why. Hopefully it doesn't mean that they're, slowly disappearing, but it's definitely one that's sort of endemic to this Sky Island big pine. And then the bird to the right is also a flycatcher. It's an olive-sided flycatcher, and it's larger than a peewee, and it's got this nice dark vest that you can see, in a pretty large bill and streaked under tail coverts. But this is also one that breeds up on big pine. Yeah, so this is great. Mountain quail. Some of you may have heard or seen these birds. They're higher elevation than our California quail. And they have, as you can see on the bird on the right, that's an adult. And it's bigger than a California quail, and it also has that top knot that goes straight up in the air. So rather than kind of curve backwards or frontwards, that feather has been modified and literally goes straight up. And we found, I think, 3 broods with young this year. Is that right, Jenny? Does that sound right?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, so the right is just one of these cute little camouflaged baby, and you'll see a female with up to 10 or 12 of these, small little cool little birds behind, and they're squeaking and making noise. And a lot of times we'll just encounter them while we're hiking through the forest, and they'll be there, and we won't see them until we're kind of right on top of them. And yeah, cool bird. Nuthatches. It was a really good year for nuthatches this year. The pygmy nuthatch on the right with that sort of cap, no white supercilium like the one on the left. We had really good numbers of them, which was great to see. We also get white-breasted nuthatches, and then the red-breasted nuthatch, which is the bird on the left. So two different species here, and then there's a third. So yeah, the black chin sparrow, the one that's singing on the left, it was a good year for them as well. And then the Lawrence's goldfinch, which I think is, a lot of people's favorite bird. It's just a really cool little bird. We see a fair number of them. One of the things that I'll mention with the Lawrence's goldfinches is that we had a ton of them show up after the Zaka fire. And I think it's literally over, if I can remember, over 100 that we recorded within a couple of years after the Zaka fire. And so I think, that was another really cool bit of data that we collected, that, these birds, along with Flageolet buntings, they were, I'm just going to look real quick. Let's see. Yeah, so Las buntings, we would get like 0, maybe 10 or 20, and then we had 108 in 2009. So 2 years after the Zaka fire, it jumped up significantly. And same with the Lawrence's goldfinch, we might get 1 to 10 at the most. And then, so Zaka fire was 2007, 2008, we had 37. And then 2009, we had 114. So really interesting. And then, a couple of years after that, they kind of tapered off and returned to more normal numbers, in the tens, maybe 20. So that was a really cool piece of information that we were able to get while we were up there, that these birds were kind of fire followers. Yeah, you can talk about this one, Jenny. This is a cool bird.
Well, I know it's cool, but I don't know how cool it really was. It's just stunning, the color, but apparently this is also a bird that Linus got on his trip, which was just a few days before our trip. And we believe this is the same bird. It's just an individual male indigo bunting in full, like, amazing plumage season. So that was a real treat. And this was pretty close to where we were camping. This was not my trip, although I was looking. Like John was saying, this seemed like a great place where you would think condors would want to be and hang out. All the big trees, lots of elevation changes, and really, as the condor flies, not far from the Bitter Creek Refuge area, where we know there's a pretty good sized population. So that's it, John, if you wanted to show anything else.
Sure, yeah. Why don't, if you stop sharing your screen, maybe we can, let's see, we could do questions. Oh, I wanted to talk to Steve, actually. Maybe we can move on to the latest trip up there, which was Steve Colwell and Mark Holmgren, who followed Linus's route from Santa Barbara Canyon and then down via like Medulce Trail. I'm not sure what the exact designation is, but basically you came in from the other end of the road that Peter and Jenny used to get in there. Steve, can you want to share a little bit about that? Actually, you know what, I could share the screen and show your trip report. I think that was our original plan.
Do you have the Google Map link, by the way?
Yeah. Let me
So,
find that.
So while he's getting that, I'll tell you that, so this was exciting for me because I'm a new birder. I started in September and with birding, and I've been delighted about Santa Barbara County because it's astounding the stuff we have with the oceans and the mountains. So I've been going all over looking at birds this year. And then I started hearing about Big Pine. I had no idea that in the middle of Santa Barbara County, there's this quite large mountain and you can't get there. It's really hard to get there, like really hard. So I'm talking to Linus before he goes and he says, oh yeah, I'm going to go on a little hiking trip. I have no idea what he's talking about. And he carried 56 pounds in his pack, took all his water, and hiked 46 miles to go in and around and out again. I mean, he's all by himself. I mean, he is a studly guy. So the route that the cars take in there from Upper Oso, that's, I think, about 25 miles. They're driving over dirt roads. And so you're 25 miles from civilization when you get to Big Pine. And the route we took coming in from the Northeast, you have to first drive for 3 hours you have to go through New Kuyama, which is way the heck out there. Yeah. And just to get to the starting point. So we drove for 3 hours, we get there, then we saddle up our bikes. And I should say that Linus started that same point, but when you hike in, it's a different path. It's more direct. So he had, I think, a 14-mile hike when he came in from that entry point to get to Big Pine. But we took the road that's shown in blue here. And so we go sideways for a while, very steep uphill. And I think that was about 16 miles total. So the distance is not bad if you have a bike, an electric bike that can do it, but we're extremely concerned about the running out of battery because we're not in the greatest shape. We're in pretty good shape. This was Mark Holmgren and me. He's the expert birder, and I'm the newbie who is very excited to go. So we put together this trip, and
I'm just scrolling here because I know there's a picture of your
there's
gear.
our gear. Yep, thank you. And so Mark has this trailer rigged up. That's my bike in the back. And the entire trick here was to figure out how we could do it and not get stranded in the wilderness, because I've never camped before, so it was quite an adventure. So we took 2 batteries each for our electric bikes. We calculated it all out, that we would have enough energy to get in, get out, and then, you know, there's unforeseen circumstances arise. So we ended up leaving with only 2% battery left on Mark's battery by the time we crested the last hill. So we were thinking it's quite hard. Here I am going up a hill with my crazy hat.
Oh, that's it. We got it.
As you can tell, Mark thinks my hat is hilarious. So we were just so excited that we made it out safely. And I have to say, it's a difficult thing with all the planning and everything just to get in there. But it's the mecca for birders, because you get in and it's, as they were talking about earlier, there's no people. You camp in the middle of the road. We were in the middle of the road for 2 days and nobody comes by, nothing. It's all yours. We didn't see a single other human the whole time we were in there.
Wow.
So it's excellent. So shall we look at some birds?
Sure. Let me, so I've made it so it'll show all your photos. Is this a suitable way to go through your?
That's good. Show that middle mountain quail photo. These guys are so cute with these antenna sort of feathers. That's great. And we saw a brood of that. This fellow was guarding while the chicks were hustling into the brush. And this is the first time this is the first time to see many of these birds. I've heard mountain quail in the Carpinteria Hills, in fact, in Romero Canyon, but I never got to see one. And so this is one of the many birds. It was the first time sight for me up there. Beautiful birds. And then you could go to play one of the flying-related owls. Have you listened to those, John? Is one good?
This one looks pretty good, yeah.
That's a pretty good feeling for what they sound like, because they have this kind of gruff little sound. I really like it.
Yeah, I was reading about them, and Peter, correct me if I'm passing disinformation here, but there's some talk that it could actually be an adaptive mimicry thing. Like they sound like a bigger owl because, you know, conceivably that helps protect them from predators who might otherwise go after them if they know they're a little tiny owl. And also they're kind of ventriloquistic, like they sound like a big owl much further away than they actually are. You know, they can kind of, you know, modulate the volume of their calls. And if you're close to them, they might actually sound like, oh, I'm hearing a very distant owl, but no, they're real close to you. They're just being kind of quiet about it.
Yeah, that sounds plausible. They definitely have a pretty rough sounding voice, kind of like you're saying, like a little guy trying to sound bigger. So our first night there, so we camped. One thing about biking in there is you're exhausted when you get there. It took us all day to get in. And then we got up at midnight and went owling. So we went to a spot. Mark was collecting data at each of the standard campsites for survey records, but he also wanted to try this new spot for owling. So we went halfway between Alomar Camp and Big Pine. And it was great. We heard 5 different kinds of owls there that night. Really, and the northern saw-whet just wouldn't shut up. So that was cool. He was hooting all around, and so quite a variety.
Is that like, so that's the road that kind of winds along the north face of Big Pine Mountain as you go, you know, from the place that we camped on our trip towards Alomar Saddle. You know, that's kind of the area where I know that Linus had given the coordinates for the flammulated owl that he had.
Yeah, that's where we went, because we had camped at Alomar Saddle that first night. And so we walked up Big Pine Road toward Big Pine in the night to get to the spot. So the first day that we went out, we went down to Upper Bear and Lower Bear.
Mhm.
I don't know if the car,
Kind of down here.
Jenny and Peter, if you went there.
We
But
did, yeah.
Upper Bear was full of birds, very birdy, and there was water running there. And there were huge bear tracks, like really big. So it was an exciting place to go. Lots of nuthatches, and we saw quite a few breeding birds. It was very nice.
Did you see the bears?
No, we didn't see the bears. Mark really wanted to see the bears. I really didn't want to see the bears.
I really didn't either, and I did. I
You
was
did?
alone and I walked up on one.
Is that right? Nice.
Yeah. But before I could even get scared, it ran fast away from me.
So my favorite bird was the pygmy nuthatches. Show that picture there.
Yeah.
Because they're just so cute. And they also, I don't know if you probably had it too, but they were all just filling the trees right above where we were camping. So you know, in the afternoon, you could lie there and they'd be scooting through the trees and burbling their little songs. They're just delightful. But I should say that we went in about 3 weeks after Jenny and Peter did. And we were hustling to get in there before the weather turned too hot, because of the biking trouble of getting in there. So I think we just made it before the really hot heat. And it'll be interesting to go back and see. I don't know if there's many records for, say, August, to see what happens to the birds. Are they still around? What are they doing?
Yeah, I'm curious. I know,
Pictures.
Peter, that in the past, you know, the focus has always been getting in there, like in the June, July, like the main breeding window, because you're documenting breeding birds, you know, being present. Have there been survey trips in the fall? Or, I mean, I'm curious what would happen there.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting, because we don't really go up during that time. We've always talked about it, you know, trying to do another trip. But usually we're only able to pull off one a year.
Yeah.
You know, the weather is obviously an issue if it's raining or, you know, even snowing up there in the winter. You know, it'd be pretty tough to travel up there.
Yeah, and you could get stuck if the weather.
Yeah, it's
changes
one
while
of
you're up
those, certainly one of those questions that we've always wanted to, you know, try and answer.
I had to show the indigo bunting. So all 3 groups that went up there this year got this one male indigo bunting. I think that's very cool.
Yeah, I guess it's the same guy. It was in the same area you were describing, pretty near the camp in the Cianovis area. And I'm pretty sure it was the same one 3 weeks later.
So cool. Great pictures.
Yeah, it was just wonderful. Unfortunately, I had my little camera, and it was just killing me that I couldn't pick the, you know, because I was looking at the pictures you were showing of, you know, you were setting up camp and we were looking at the back of your car there and you had all that stuff in there. Oh, we wanted that stuff.
Yeah.
We were just carrying minimal things. Like I took my little camera. But you do what you have to do.
That's right. At least you got to go.
That's right.
Okay, so is there anything else you want me to show in particular before I?
No, that's good.
All right, I'll go ahead and stop my screen share. Okay, so I'll throw the floor open, and we're kind of, you know, we're well over my 1 hour target time, but it's just such a fascinating topic, at least for me. Any questions folks have for, you know, about the surveys or about the location? Yeah, I guess one question I had, Peter, you know, so knowing that you have been out there doing surveys prior to the Zaka fire, you know, how much of a change have you seen in the habitat and in the presence of birds? Is there anything that you can directly attribute to the effects of the fire? I realize there's a lot of things going on, but what do you think the effect has been?
Well, the fire, when it came through, it was kind of a mosaic. So it you know, heavily burned some areas and then left other areas, you know, untouched. So it didn't obviously wipe out the entire area, but it did burn pretty hot on the very peak of Big Pine, where there used to be bigger sugar pines and some ponderosa Jeffrey pine. And we're not seeing those really being regenerated up there. So it's a little bit of a bummer that there's a shrub called a ceanothus that's taking over kind of in these burned areas that were open from the fire, and now they're coming back. So the ceanothus is growing. It's very dense, and again, up on the top of Big Pine at the peak, and we're not really seeing a lot of younger trees. So yeah, that's a good sort of aerial image of, you know, the peak where all those pine trees are that were once, you know, held a lot of different kinds of birds are not there anymore.
Yeah,
so that may be sort of the biggest change that I've seen. And the ceanothus kind of comes with a different set of birds that, you know, that are not necessarily tied to conifers. So like blue-gray gnatcatchers, for example, we're seeing, you know, quite an increase in species like blue-gray gnatcatchers, and you know, obviously a decrease in, you know, all-sided flycatchers and birds that would use the trees.
Yeah. So you know, again, I'd be very curious to get out there, you know, if it can happen. I mean, anytime, but it'd be interesting to be there in the fall, because I would imagine there might be some, you know, chance of sort of interesting vagrants that are, you know, roaming the landscape, and, you know, here's an island of habitat that might be suitable for some of them, you know, something that would attract birds like that. I know it's hard to get permission. You know, some years it seems like the Forest Service hasn't even allowed the you know, an expedition to go in there. Is that true? Like, or some years are you just not getting in at all, depending on like fire or access or stuff going on?
Yeah, there was one year, and there's a lot of changeover in the Forest Service. So, you know, we're constantly dealing with new people. So once we kind of get a little system down, then the next year it can completely change. And there was one year we were all set up, we got all of our permission, we loaded our vehicles, and, you know, we're literally starting to head up, and we get this call that says, oh, you know, we just talked to the forest supervisor, and there's supposed to be like a rain shower, and he has decided that he doesn't want you to go up. So, you know, as you can imagine, you know, we had packed everything we needed, taken time off, you know, and had to turn around and go back. So it's, yeah, even though, you know, yeah, we do try to go up every year, it doesn't always happen.
Anyone else have any questions before we bring it to a close?
No.
Yeah.
I just want to say this is the best Zoom ever. And I was so impressed about how isolated it is and how hard it is to get there. And I also wanted to say that the picture of the flammulated owl was so impressive, and it's so camouflaged, as a lot of birds are, but that was impressive to me, how you couldn't even see it. It was a small owl, but you couldn't see it. Yeah. It was very impressive to me.
Yeah, it certainly is. And it reminded me of something. I corresponded with Joan Lentz a little bit this week about this meeting coming up. And one of the things that she emphasized that I feel is important to pass on is that, you know, for her and for a lot of people who've spent time going out there, it's really a very special place. And it's, you know, it's unique in terms of the habitat. It's unique in terms of the isolation. And I think it's important that if, you know, sharing the information about this wonderful spot and how cool it is, if that makes it seem more enticing for more people to go there, I think it's very important to also point out again how difficult it is to get there, how you can definitely get into trouble if you go there, you know, without the required experience, without the required preparation and equipment. And also just that people should, you know, if you're going to go there, I think it's important for people to just understand how special a place it is and to treat it with the respect that it deserves, and, you know, really take care of that location and not allow, you know, the urge to go explore kind of get ahead of don't get ahead of yourself and go in there and actually do damage to the habitat or put yourself at risk. But just treat it with a lot of respect because it really is a beautiful site.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, well, okay, well, last call for questions or feedback. Yeah, Anne.
I just want to express also my appreciation for both the report on the Pelicans, of course, whom we were very worried about, and we've got a whole bunch of heroes here today, and thank you, heroes, heroines. Thank you. Very precious sharing that happened. Thanks a lot. My husband's here. He tried to get on the other way, but at any rate.
Back door.
Thanks to all of you.
Yeah, and I'll second that, and thank you, Jenny, and thank you, Peter, and thank you, Steve. It means a lot to me to be able to, because you take time out to come and be interrogated about your fun experience. We've all had a lot of Zoom meetings in the last few years, and it's not necessarily as exciting as going to Big Pine Mountain to sit down at a Zoom meeting. But I appreciate you guys made the time for it. Thank you for that.
Thanks for that opportunity.
Talking about Big Pine is the next best thing to be in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really want to go back now. I'm looking forward to the next opportunity. Okay, well, thank you everybody very much. I think I may have forgotten to mention, I posted on the Carp Birdwatchers website about this. We're not going to have an outing, an official Carpinteria Birdwatchers outing this month. So, go birding with each other if you want. There just won't be an official sanctioned group event. Tom and Laurel are out of town. I've been kind of under the weather and not able to do as much birding. So we'll come back strong in August and have a really good time. And I look forward to seeing you out there. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny.
Thanks. Feel better, John.
Yeah, thank you.